Margaret just gave birth to a beautiful girl. Everything went really smooth. Max, the father, was really glad that they had a healthy girl together. The doctor asked them to take their girl just for a quick check. They both agreed. When the doctor grabbed the baby and held her, he instantly turned pale. The baby had whispered something in his ear. The doctor panicked for quite a while. Due to his behavior, Margaret only got more stressed. After waiting for half an hour, the doctor stepped into the room. What is going on? Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. When he finally starts to talk, all he can do is stutter. I'm so sorry. Margaret's eyes go wide and fill up with tears when her doctor speaks those dreadful words. I have made a big mistake. But what mistake had the doctor made? And what did the baby whisper? After 3 years of trying to get pregnant, Margaret and her husband, Timothy, were prepared to hear the doctor say, "I'm sorry" one more time. They had already started to think that they were not having any children of their own. So when they found out she was pregnant, it was like a dream come true for both of them. The doctor was waiting for them to deliver some good news on the next checkup. The doctor greeted the couple and said, "Margaret, you're not having a child, you're having twins." She and Timothy just couldn't believe it. They had never given up hope, of course. Getting pregnant was not the only difficulty the couple would face. 1 month before giving birth to her twins, Margaret was watching TV when suddenly she started to experience painful stomach cramps. At least, that was how she could best describe it, since she had no actual idea what was wrong with her. Nervous that something might be wrong with her babies, she called Timothy and told him she was feeling the worst abdominal pain she has ever had. He rushed to their home to pick her up. They had decided to pay the doctor an extra visit so Margaret could describe her symptoms, hoping that he knew what was going on. The doctor was a bit agitated and in a rush. Margaret described all her symptoms. The doctor concluded that there was nothing to worry about. He was quite certain that the stomach cramps may have been caused by food poisoning or stress. The doctor excused himself and left in a hurry. The doctor's rush made them feel uneasy, as they thought he wasn't even paying attention to Margaret when she was describing her symptoms. They decided to go home and trust the doctor. There was no reason at all to doubt the doctor's words. He knew the doctor was in eminence as an obstetrician. Timothy stopped the car and Margaret got in. On their way back home, he tried to calm her down using all the arguments he had just thought of while getting the car. However, his words would prove empty. Over the following weeks, the pain continued to shoot up her stomach. As the days passed, the frequency and intensity just increased. At this point, both Margaret and Timothy were really worried. Margaret decided that she would not go to the hospital this time. She would try to reach her doctor on the phone. She did not have to wait for that much. When the doctor picked up and heard the same woman's symptoms, he tried to calm her down. He insisted on stress being the cause of all her pains. But the day Margaret was expected to give birth, the pains suddenly stopped. As the expected date of delivery approached, the pains had started to disappear. Margaret was certain the cramps would come back when labor started. To her surprise, there were no cramps. However, she did not go into labor on her due date. In fact, she would not go into labor for a while. The doctor again blamed it on the stress and said it may extend the length of a pregnancy. Back at home, the couple did what any other couple would: search for information. They found plenty of websites. They felt at ease as they read it was normal for the actual date of birth to differ from the expected one. The woman's prolonged pregnancy was raising serious doubts as to his diagnosis. Had he actually missed something? What were the consequences of his possible mistake? However, there was something he could do. The doctor was then a bit more worried. With no hesitation, he contacted Margaret to check up on her. The pain hadn't returned, so that was a good sign. What was not a good sign was the fact that she hadn't gone into labor, so the doctor gave her some tips on how to induce labor naturally. Margaret felt all her worries were soothed away. However, the tranquility would not last longer as a shooting pain began right in her stomach. Apparently, it had worked. She was going into labor. When Timothy realized what was going on, he immediately put on some clothes and helped Margaret to get in the car. Once in the car, they kissed and left for the hospital. On their way to the hospital, Timothy called the doctor and told him Margaret had gone into labor a few minutes before. When they arrived, the labor and delivery rooms were waiting for her. Luckily, he had called in advance, as it would turn out they barely had a second to spare. From there on, things seemed to happen really fast. After being in the room for less than 10 minutes, one of the babies started crowing. They had to do this now, and a doctor was called to come help. The doctor came with a fast stride from around the corner, surprising Timothy by first sight. The two of them realized in that moment that they had been in contact before, the moment when this doctor had so rudely brushed Margaret's concerns aside a few months ago. Was this a coincidence? How was this doctor still allowed to help them in this critical phase? Even though Timothy had noticed this in an instant, Margaret herself was in too much pain to even look up to greet the doctor, let alone recognize the man. Timothy noticed this. On the one hand, he had half a mind to try and refuse this doctor's help. Yet he knew that there was little time left and actions needed to be taken with speed. The doctor seemed to be fully engaged in the process. This calmed Timothy down significantly. His focus returned to his wife that was currently in labor. She now needed all the support she could get from him. Things went a little smoother from here. Within half an hour after the doctor had arrived, the first baby was already born. Timothy held the newborn. He could barely believe that he was looking at his own child. They quickly cut the umbilical cord, and after he gave the baby to a nurse standing next to him. However, the work here was not yet done. Of course, there was the second one that was entering the world now. As is often with twins, the second one is the one that comes with more trouble. At least for another 2 hours, Margaret had to push. There was the second child the couple had put on this earth at last. They were born and Margaret had accomplished the mission. She could now finally surrender to her exhaustion. They held the second baby for a brief moment before it was quickly taken by the nurse, as well to do a couple of standard tests. Now, it was Timothy that had an additional request. The reason for Timothy having another request was the fact that they had been through an abnormal amount of trouble during the pregnancy. Timothy asked the nurses to go with them during the tests to make sure that everything was all right with both of the babies. It was not standard procedure, and one of the nurses explained that permission for this was needed from the head doctor. This was a problem for Timothy. Timothy's issue with this was that he did not want the doctor to know about the special request, as he still did not fully trust him. His fear was that the doctor might not take his worries seriously like he did last time. The doctor could brush the additional test to the side as an unnecessary cost, or something like that. Timothy told this to the nurses, explaining the previous experience he had with this doctor. Time slowly passed, minute by minute, until only after more than 2 hours someone knocked on the door. The restless husband and wife surely expected a couple of nurses to walk in, bringing the babies with them and handing them over. It was not actually a nurse that got in, but a man in a doctor's uniform. The doctor that appeared that had helped Margaret before with the delivery as well as before. Timothy and Margaret knew instantly that something was wrong. He could barely look the couple in the eyes. The doctor seemed stern and confident enough in the times that they had interacted before. But before Timothy or Margaret could say anything or ask what was going on, the doctor started stuttering, saying, "I am so sorry." No more than these words were needed to make the husband and wife feel their whole world collapsing. Timothy immediately felt as if something was terribly wrong with the babies. How could it be the extra tests were just requested to be extra sure? It turned out that Timothy was only partly right. The checkup resulted in the conclusion that the twins had caught a bacteria during Margaret's pregnancy. The doctor announced this with a terribly serious tone. They came to the conclusion that most likely the bacteria was caught in relation to Margaret's stomach cramps. The doctor was very aware of the fact that he had to a great extent ignored these complaints all these months ago. He truly felt terrible about this. Making such a mistake was unforgivable. So he thought. The doctor's attitude from before was very close to causing disastrous consequences. Only because Timothy had had a feeling of distrust towards him, it was avoided. The doctor stood there now, shamefully and with tears in his eyes, asking whether the couple would ever be able to forgive him for his deeds. One might expect that Timothy and Margaret would have a problem forgiving the doctor. Instead, they were just over the moon that their baby twins were healthy and unharmed. As they had waited in extreme tension for so long, now finally the weight of the world fell off their shoulders. A weight also fell off the doctor's shoulders, and he promised himself that his attitude would very much change from now on. The moment finally came that Timothy and Margaret walked out of the hospital's front doors the following week. They were tired, but most of all very happy. In the weeks that came after, it turned out that no further health issues followed from the bacteria. The family was very much looking forward to spend the rest of their lives